Michael Sweet of Stryper is here. What's going on, man?
How are you, man? It's getting cold here where I am. I'm in Plymouth, Massachusetts,
Ah,
and we're getting a snowstorm tonight. I
oh
guess a
wow.
pretty good one too.
Is that where you live now?
Yeah, I've lived here since '95.
Okay. What made a guy, you're from Orange County, right?
Originally from Orange County, born in Whittier, California.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, Lived in California my entire life for the most part, except Oklahoma 1 year, which doesn't really count. And I've been here since '95. So this is actually feeling more like home than California.
Well, yeah, I mean that's what 25 years now. So
Yeah.
I would say that's home now. And so I would ask you what brought you there, but maybe you'll be able to tell us when you're telling the story of your life, because you got a crazy life, man. You want to, I know you got a Christmas special coming out soon, so you could tell us about that. Maybe at the end. But before we do that, would you mind taking us all the way back and just letting us know what got you into music to begin with?
Sure. Oh my gosh. Well, I always say that I was born into music, and it's in my DNA. And I know a lot of people say that, but it really is true in terms of my story. My parents are singers. My parents are songwriters. My grandparents are singers. My grandparents are songwriters. Uh, Performers. My mom and my aunt and my grandmother, way back in the '50s, were part of the Gunsmoke Live circuit that toured around the country, and they were the trio that sang for that. So I grew up in music. I was born into it, and I didn't have a choice. Not that I would have made a different choice.
Uh-huh.
And from the time I was born to as I sit here in front of you, music's all that I've known, all that I really cared about and loved. And I'm very passionate about it. It's like getting up and taking my first breath, or waking up and eating my first meal. It's my food, it's my air, it's everything really. And I'm very blessed to be able to say that I've been doing it my whole life. Amazing.
Do you remember, so of course your parents were very into music. Do you remember some of the first steps you took on your own to kind of start pursuing music? Maybe when you picked up a guitar or picked up the microphone or maybe started jotting down some lyrics.
Well, I used to do what my parents termed bopping. So when I was an infant, and my dad would play music, which was all the time, and it ranged from Elvis to Creedence Clearwater Revival and everything in between. Um, I would start rocking back and forth the minute he started playing the music. I'd start like bopping back and forth in time. I always had a pretty good sense of time, and I would make up lyrics. My parents actually wrote down some lyrics that I was making up. I think when I was 2 years old, 2.5 years old. It's about my grandmother, and it just started at such an early age. That desire to write songs and to sing and to perform. And got my first guitar when I was 5. Um, didn't really start taking it serious till a little bit later on. So I was 10, 11 years old. And I didn't start singing professionally. This might sound funny, but till I was 12 years old. I joined my brother's band, and my dad kind of twisted his arm to audition me.
Uh-huh.
I was the punk kid brother, 12 years old. My brother was 15.
Right.
He was a grown up, and I was this little kid, and he didn't want to audition me, but my dad talked him into it. When he did, the
How
rest
old
is
was your
history.
brother? He was in high school?
15.
Okay. Okay.
3 years older than me.
Oh, interesting. That is quite the ask of the older brother to let your little brother who's still kind of in middle school play
Yeah.
in your high school band. Were his friends receptive, or did they need some convincing too?
His friends didn't need as much convincing as he did.
Okay.
He needed a lot more
Were you a pretty cool
because
middle schooler? Did you were you looking the
I
part a
was
little bit?
I wasn't uncool, but I
Uh-huh.
was a bit of a brat, man. I did some things back in those days where I could see why my brother at the time wouldn't want to be associated with me.
Uh-huh.
I was skipping school, and I was, I'm a prankster. I was pulling pranks on people, and had some interesting times back in those days
Sure.
that I got out of.
So you
Once
had
I
some
got into his band and got serious about music, that's what really took me in a better direction.
gave you purpose, right?
Exactly.
But maybe those hijinks gave you a little bit of rock and roll cred.
It would definitely, it's contributed to my rebel personality. I've always been a rebel,
Right,
and
right,
I'll always be a rebel. If 10 people are going that way, I'm going that way.
right,
It's how I'm built.
right.
And that applies to my style, my music, everything that I do. And I like to do the opposite of what everyone else is doing.
Yeah. Well, it seems to have worked for you. So so how'd you go from jamming with your brother? How did things advance from there?
Well, we started jamming together, and we were playing backyard parties, uh, 12, 13, 14 years old, and started eventually moving our way into the Hollywood club scene. I think I played the Whiskey a Go-Go for the first time when I was 15, almost 16.
Nice.
And I wasn't honest about my age.
Uh-huh.
You were supposed to be a certain age to play there. And, I looked older, but I
Uh-huh.
wasn't. So
And this was in the 80s, right?
this is going back in the late 70s.
Late 70s. Okay. Can you paint us a picture a little bit about what the whiskey was like and the Sunset Strip? Because I don't feel like, I know that the 80s was like the glory heyday of the Sunset Strip. Was it as fun and as dangerous and as cool as it seemed?
Oh yeah, it was. There was something really magical and very special about those days in particular. And you hear about the scene there in the 60s and in the 70s, but something about the late 70s and the early 80s was
Hmm.
really extra special and explosive. I mean, you could go down to Hollywood, and you could go to the Whiskey and watch you know, Yesterday and Today, who is now Y&T. Go down to Gazzari's and watch Stryper and Rat and Wasp, and go over to the Troubadour and watch Motley Crue. I mean, that was the scene there, and those were the bands that were playing, and many other bands. And then you'd walk out on the street, and all these musicians were just walking the street, decked out to the nines, and
Right.
you'd
Right.
talk to them, and here's this guy from this band and this guy from that band, and it was just a sea of incredible music and musicianship, and it was really amazing.
How prevalent was like the hair band look on the strip? Aside from the musicians who were in the bands, like was the average Joe, were there a lot of them occupying that look as well? Or was it a mix?
There was definitely a lot of them occupying that look, but I'd go as far as to say that I think we were one of those bands that kind of had that look going on before it really took off. In other words, back when I was 15 and 16 playing at the Whiskey, in 70, I was born in 63, so 70, 70, 78, 79. I had the look, and we had the clothes and the makeup and all that, and there weren't a lot of bands doing it. But then eventually there were a lot of bands doing it
Right,
around
right.
80, 81, 82. That's when it really took off. So we were kind of on the front lines, so to speak. And I'm not sure how that worked out, but it did. My brother was always more about the visionary, the visual side of things, and I was more about the musical side of things. So
Mm,
we were a lethal combination. It worked
yeah.
really well.
Yeah, both. You need both in rock and roll.
Yep.
So you're playing the Whiskey. How was that first Whiskey gig? Do you remember?
Oh my gosh, yeah. The first Whiskey gig that I played, we were called Rock's Regime. Okay, and we were playing with and for a band called Dubrow, which was Kevin Dubrow's band after Quiet Riot.
Wow.
And I'll never forget, we used a lot of hairspray, and Kevin, we were backstage, a small little area. He kicked our dressing room door open and told us to stop using so much expletive hairspray. And that's my main memory from that night.
Well, that's awesome. Was Quiet Riot? I mean, you said after Quiet Riot. So how did a high school band get a gig at the Whiskey with a former member of Quiet Riot?
I don't know. I think what happened was we were very aggressive and still are. We're go-getters, and we go after stuff, and we knocked on a lot of doors, made a lot of phone calls, hung our posters, had them made and hung them all up and down the strip.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we worked our cans off at a very early age. When I was 16, 17 years old, we started recording our first demos and shopping for record deals when I was a teenager. We landed our deal with Enigma when I was 20 years old, and released our first album when I had just turned 21. So we started at a really early age going after that. And I think that it made it easier for us to get into some of these venues like the Whiskey and Troubadour and Gazzarri's. We were a house staple band at Gazzarri's. We played every weekend practically.
Gotcha. So you guys were developing a name for yourself at that point already, just through being visible on the strip.
Yep.
Well, that's awesome. So you got a great start with your brother. You're playing the Whiskey with some really cool artists, and then where do things go from there?
Well, I mean, when we signed our record deal and we released our first album, The Yellow and Black Attack, we were thinking we might sell a couple thousand copies of it, and we would have been absolutely thrilled to do so. But when it came out, and in less than a month, we sold almost 200,000 copies.
Wow.
And when we went back to the Troubadour to perform after the album had come out, there was a line literally all the way up from Santa Monica to Sunset. So a huge line of people. And they turned away. It was in the papers the next day, and it was a big deal. And we felt like, okay, this is something special. Something's happening here.
Yeah, that's a long line. Although from Sunset all the way to Santa Monica, for those who don't live in Hollywood, that's what, 2 large blocks with kind of mini blocks in between those blocks.
2 large blocks, yeah, exactly. And they got pictures of it. There was a photo of it. I wish I could find the paper that released the photo, but it was pretty impressive.
Yeah.
And that was with the venue already packed, shoulder to shoulder.
And at this point, were you guys Stryper now at this point, or
yes, at that point we were Stryper. Yep.
Okay.
And the way that came to be is we were called Rock's Regime, and the label didn't really care for the name, and I was very happy about that because I never really cared for the name. So we started thinking about names. All of our walls were striped already. All the gear was striped already. And someone threw out the name Stryper. And we're like, that's perfect.
Yeah.
And we became Stryper.
Yeah, it's definitely cooler. Rock's Regime, a little too on the nose there,
Every time someone would say, what's the name of your band? I'd say Rock's Regime. It would never fail that they would come back with a, excuse me, or huh?
Right.
Every time.
So you guys got a great start, 200,000 sales, lines down the block in Hollywood. And so it sounds like it was kind of lift off from the beginning.
It was, but it didn't feel like it because we had been literally working so hard since I was 12, 13 years old,
right,
to that point. So a 7-year period of really hard work felt like an eternity.
Sure. So it wasn't an overnight success story by any means. What can you tell us a little bit about how you caught the attention of your label? The label, was it just because they had been seeing you around the strip, and obviously you guys are playing these great gigs? Did someone was there a store there? Did someone come to one of your shows? Did someone give you guys a call? What happened with that?
Well, we used to record all of our demos at a studio called the Casbah. And that was in Fullerton, California. And a guy owned that studio by the name of John St. James.
Okay.
John was a musician, producer, writer. He worked with a number of bands. One of the people he worked with was the singer for Berlin and her group. And he worked with lots of people.
Right.
But we were one of the bands that he worked with. And eventually he sold the studio, and his partner took over, a guy by the name of Chaz Ramirez, and we continued making demos with Chaz. But anyway, John St. James connected us with the label Enigma, because he had a band that signed to Enigma. So we took our demo in after, a few years and a few demos. We took our demo in, had it pressed up. Robert taped the cover, made it look professional, nice and everything. We took it in, they listened to it, they liked it. We set up a showcase at a friend's rehearsal studio, a big warehouse. Former guitar player by the name of Richard Oderbagen. We called him Odie. And we did a showcase, man. It was loud and bombastic, and we got a record deal based on that.
Hell
and
yeah.
It was funny because once we signed the deal, they asked for the lyrics. When we submitted the lyrics, they actually thought about dropping us because of the lyrics.
And why was that? Because of, well, go ahead. Tell me why.
Well, because they were just so blatantly Christian.
Right.
And apparently it was hard for them to hear him and understand him when we were doing the showcase. I don't know.
Right. Do you think that that was part of maybe your at least mainstream appeal? Because there's not a lot of bands who can be who are singing non-secular music who are also successful just in the mainstream, and you guys were able to do that. But it's funny though, because when you listen to your music though, sometimes you might not notice, because if you're living in the era of shout at the devil, to hell with the devil kind of sounds, just the same, or similar, not obviously it's a different message. But do you think that was part of the success?
I think it was, but at the same time, the other side of that coin, I'll say that it was part of the reason why we weren't as successful as well. If that makes any sense.
It does, yeah.
And, the reason why I know that to be fact is it was very difficult to get MTV to play our videos. It was very difficult to get radio to play our songs. And even though there was always some excuse and some reason, it always kind of came back to the message and what we sang about.
Right.
And, we wouldn't have it any other way. We wouldn't change a thing.
Yeah.
Because this is what we believe. This is, we're equally as passionate about our faith just as much as we are our music. It's a big piece of what we do. Sure.
And it's I talk to a lot of artists, and one of the main pieces of advice is they say you got to do what you want to do, otherwise you're not going to be able to do it well. So
exactly.
So
true.
While it may have hindered, made more challenges for you guys, at the same time you may have been at that level to begin with because of the passion you put into the project. No
question. I think it gave us our own, and the thing is we never sat down and planned it out like, hey, let's do this and that so we can do this and that.
Right.
It was never like that. We just followed our hearts, did what we wanted to do. We knew it would be hard. We knew it would be difficult and a big mountain to climb. But man, it's always been that way for us. And I think it's made us very resilient and even more passionate about what we do and how we do it. And it drives us to keep doing it. Right.
Did you ever have anyone maybe at the label or management or just a friend or anyone be like, why don't you guys just, tone down the Jesus stuff a little bit and maybe it'll be easier? Did you ever have someone say that to you?
Oh yeah, all the time. As a matter of fact, we were kind of encouraged to follow our hearts. And what I mean by that is we were telling each other to do the same, like, hey guys, let's tone down. Oz would talk to me and I'd talk to Robert. And let's tone down the message and try this. And that was for the Against the Law album.
Uh-huh.
It went in a different direction. It wasn't as lyrically, it wasn't as bold, wasn't as spiritual. It was a little bit more about, like we had a song called Two-Time Woman, and it was just a different thing for us.
Right.
We grew beards and we're scowling and
Uh-huh.
lost the yellow and black, and it just became a different band during that era.
Right.
And I think some peer pressure was definitely applied for sure by the label and a number of other people and ourselves.
So it sounds like it was just a phase though. So you guys kind of, you're like, well, that didn't work as well because that wasn't as authentic. That didn't feel like.
Thank God
Right.
it was a phase, because as great as that album sounds, from a professional point of view, it was produced by Tom Wehrman, who's a legendary producer.
Yeah.
And it's a killer album. Great engineering. Yeah. It's not Stryper.
Right. And
it's just not.
So one of the things that makes artists great is uniqueness, and the fact that you guys were willing to stay true to yourselves despite the effect it might have, probably gave you a stronger grassroots following, your fans are really your fans, and
Oh yeah.
and more enduring fandom, I would say. So you had all this success with the band, but that wasn't enough for you. You needed to do some solo stuff and some other stuff. So let's not forget about some of the great solo work that you've done. And you've even played guitar for Boston, one of, if they're not in the Hall of Fame, I'm sure they will be at some point soon. How was that?
It was amazing. I played guitar and sang. I was one of two singers. I sang half and Tommy sang the other half, and it was amazing. I mean, it was an interesting time and a very unsettled time because my wife was sick at the time and I was her caretaker, and I couldn't see myself going out on a tour, so I thought long and hard about not doing it. And she really encouraged me to do it, so I did. But it was tough. I'm not going to lie. But it was amazing standing on stage night after night with the band and an album that really inspired me. Probably first and foremost, unlike any other band. I mean, that's the first album I bought on my own.
Wow.
And it was a big influence to me. The sound of the album, it inspired me as a producer, writer, guitar player, singer, all that stuff. And here I am playing those songs on stage with that band. It was really cool, but it was just for a season. I wasn't meant to stay there forever because Stryper is my band.
Right.
And I felt like Boston was taking precedence, and I was having to put Stryper on a shelf more and more, and I didn't want to continue doing that. So I left the band. Michael Sweet left Boston, if you can believe that.
Right. But hey, that's a childhood dream to play with some of your heroes for a little while and actually be a part of the band. So that's
really
that's
amazing.
Epic. Yeah. How did that come about? Did they reach out to you? Did you reach out to them? Did you have mutual friends? How did that happen?
Well, Brad, we all know Brad Delp passed in 2007, tragically. And from what I understand, Boston was going to hang it up, not perform anymore. It's hard. It's been hard over the years to get them to perform. Tom's more of a stay in the studio kind of mentality, not tour as much. He's more of that thinking, and I get it. But so they were going to do one last show to honor Brad. I was invited along with Sammy Hagar, Ann Wilson, Mickey Thomas, bunch of different artists. And I wound up going and singing 4 songs, I think it was. And there was this electricity, in my opinion. I mean, I'm sure the other people would tell you the same thing from their view, but in my opinion, there was a certain special connection between myself with Boston and the Boston fans there that night. I don't know what it was.
Yeah.
But everything worked out. And it worked out so well. My feelings obviously wound up being true, because after the show, Tom Scholes came backstage and said, "Michael, that was amazing. We want to continue on, and we want you to be a part of the band."
Wow.
So it was pretty special.
That's a pretty cool story, and you had some stiff competition there, it sounds like. So
Well, I mean, yeah, Godsmack was there. There were a lot of people there performing, and it was to honor Brad and to celebrate his life. And then
yeah,
that's pretty much what the tour wound up being as well, like a celebration of Brad's life. The '08 tour, we did 56 cities with Styx opening, and
nice.
it was phenomenal.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, that what a way to honor, a band that inspired you growing
Oh
up,
yeah.
and a dream come true. It's a nice way to say thank you, and then get back to what get back to Stryper. Michael, you've been on MTV a lot. You've been on you've topped the Billboard charts. You've played with Boston, your heroes. You've released many successful solo projects. But now you got another Christmas show coming up this month. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, I started doing Christmas shows 7 years ago. And I wound up skipping 1 year, and I continued doing those shows because I loved how it felt to be able to connect with the fans at Christmas time, give back to the fans. They gave to me. Just spending time with them is really special. And I thought, man, how am I going to do that this year? Because I do it at a place called the Spire in Plymouth. It's an old church converted into a theater. And I figured, well, the only way really to do it is to stream it and do it that way. So I connected with some people, Tyler and Gil Sosi and Paul Ballantyne, and we're putting together a show. I got a full band. It's going to be rocking, but yet I'll be playing an acoustic, so kind of like a hybrid of a band versus an acoustic thing, doing some Stryper songs, solo songs, and Christmas songs as well. It's going to be a lot of fun, man.
Sounds like a lot of fun. So that's on the 19th, and how can people access that?
Well, people can get their tickets at tickets.venuenet.live.
Okay.
And that's we've got 3 tiers: a $10 ticket, just a basic, cheap, inexpensive ticket, or you could spend a little bit more and you can be on the video wall, which is called front row.
Uh-huh.
Or you could do the VIP, which is I'll hang out with you after the show and take questions and stuff. But I think those are already sold out.
Ah, okay. That's awesome. Right before, as you were saying it, I was thinking to myself, how cool would it be if there was like a backstage pass, and then you said, "Hey, VIP," a little interview afterwards. But the more
Yeah,
I hear about these
and that's
virtual
always
shows,
fun because I could do a Q&A and hang out and one-on-one time with people, which is really the best part of the show. That's my favorite part,
right?
hanging out with folks.
Sure. So that's awesome. I mean, the more I hear about these virtual shows, the more I'm like, how could you make it more like the real experience? And so that's cool. It's kind of like the after show merch table situation, or the backstage get to
Exactly.
go talk to Michael pass.
Oh yeah. And we're going to have full production, light, sound, a set. It's going to be really nice, man. It's not going to be like me on a stage, just banging it out and running around. It won't be like that. It'll be pretty special.
Very cool. So we will be checking that out. Michael, it's been a real pleasure talking to you. So much fun hearing about your story, and such a cool story. We'd like to end the interview by asking if you had one piece of advice for aspiring artists, what would it be?
My advice is always to tell artists, and sometimes this gets me in trouble because it gets them in trouble, but to tell artists to be themselves. Follow your dreams, follow your heart, not what someone else tells you your dreams and your heart should be. Now, that's not to say that you shouldn't take direction, but you need to really stick to your guns on what you feel convicted about and what you feel led to do, musically speaking, because you better than anybody else. So that's something that I live by, and I've always stuck to my guns. I've said no to labels before because they wanted me to do something that wasn't me, and I said, sorry, got to pass. And that's a tough decision to make, but one you have to make sometimes. So just really stay true to who you are.
Yeah, it's great advice, and coming from you, it really resonates, because obviously that's something that that Stryper's done. You guys really
Yeah.
did stick to your guns and stuck to your faith, and props to you guys for doing that. I do want to
Thanks.
end by I saw a hilarious interview with you. I only caught the beginning of it, but it was an old interview from the '80s, and just to get the other side of it, because even you're trying to do the right thing in your own mind.
Yep.
But there were people on the religious side who weren't so crazy about you guys either. And so
Yeah.
I was watching this old interview you guys did. It looked like an Australian talk show, and
Oh yeah.
they had some pastor or preacher come on, and he was
Yep.
talking about, these guys look effeminate and they are headbanging, and it just sounded so ridiculous by today's standards, but just pretty hilarious. I think it really just goes to show you're never going to please everybody, so you should just do what feels best for you.
You're never going to, and we still go through that stuff today. And we've learned how to be a little more thick-skinned and just kind of stay focused on what we're here to do. And what somebody says about you doesn't really matter.
Sure.
Unless you let it.
Right.
You take it to heart, and you can get depressed by it and go into a shell and never come out, or just ignore it. You keep moving forward, and that's what we've chosen to do. So there's more advice for those people out there listening and watching. Just ignore the haters. There's always going to be haters. And I've been kind of using it for comedy in my life, where I'll read a comment from someone, and I'll just kind of laugh it off instead of get angry about it.